Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Iowa State Cyclones Live here on the Voice of College Football Network. I'm your host, Levi Stevenson, with Wide Right and Natty Light, and Levi Arstep on Twitter and Blue Sky. We are here today to continue our State of the Program series. On this week, we're covering the Iowa State's pass catchers in the wide receivers and tight ends. Last week, we talked about the quarterbacks and the running backs. Quarterbacks, obviously, a fairly solidified position with Rocco Becht taking the helm. And a few other guys behind him, especially Connor Moberly and now Alex Mansky. And the running back room with Carson Hansen leading the way, and Abu Sama and Dylan Lee and a couple other freshmen coming in to fill in that spot as well. But this week we're here to talk about the pass catchers, which is a big, I would argue it's maybe the single most important position group on the team as far as figuring out who's going to be there. Maybe offensive line probably has an argument there as well, but it's probably the position that I think people are most curious about is, coming out of this 2024 season, you're looking at losing two 1,000-yard receivers, the only duo in the country that caught for 2,000 yards in Jaylin Noel and Jayden Higgins. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're also going to dive into the tight ends a little bit. And then right at the end here, we're going to talk a little bit of basketball as Iowa State's getting ready to finish up the regular season. They take on BYU tonight at 8 o'clock tip. And before they go into the Big 12, before they play this weekend, they'll play Kansas State and finish out the regular season before they go to the Big 12 tournament and then to the NCAA tournament. So we're going to talk a little bit of basketball at the end too. But to get started, like as mentioned, Iowa State is replacing two 1,000-yard receivers in Jayden Higgins and Jaylin Noel. Two different guys, but two obviously incredibly productive guys. Jaylin Noel had a fantastic career at Iowa State, spanning all the way back to even played one season with Brock Purdy. He was there long enough. And then Jayden Higgins came in as a transfer from Eastern Kentucky and put up two excellent seasons in his time in Ames, and was graded out as Pro Football Focus's highest rated receiver in the Power 5 last fall. So big shoes to fill. But it's not an impossible task here with the talent that Iowa State has assembled on the roster. But let's go look at what we got from the group last fall. Iowa State has always had a lot of pass catchers on the team. Like, got a lot of guys that catch passes, which I know is catch passes, but they typically spread the ball around fairly well. Obviously, last season you see a huge spike up here at Jayden and Jaylin, over 80 catches a piece, over 1,100 yards a piece, and by far the majority of the touchdowns. Not a huge shock there. Behind them, you've got tight end Gabe Burkle, which he played all 14 games. Caught some very important passes. Was a chain mover towards the end. Especially the guy here we'll talk about when we get to the tight ends is Ben Bramer, that you would expect for him to jump up if he can stay healthy, which he obviously did not last year. But a couple of guys that I want to talk about in the wide receiver room that I think emerged last year and are really interesting names. Carson Brown and Eli Green, both at different points in the season were thought to be, these are the backup. This is the backup to Jaylin Noel. Because that was your question. If you had Ben Nagoya on the outside and you had a couple other guys filling on the inside, who was going to be the backup to Jaylin Noel? During the North Dakota game, we thought, well, it's going to be Eli Green, because he got in, had a couple really nice catches after and runs after the catch. We're like, okay, well, this is the guy. This is the guy that's going to replace Jaylin. And then he didn't kind of really do much for a few games. And then as the season goes on, we see Carson Brown come out of nowhere. He was a former walk-on from Ankeny that came in and played some really nice snaps, had some nice plays. And it became clear that he was the guy behind Jaylin, and he did a nice job. It wasn't a game breaker, in a lot of situations, but he did a nice job, and obviously had a touchdown there. So, I think there's some interesting names there. If you keep going down the list, you get some young guys. Ben Nagoye is one of those guys, is a guy that we thought, he did functionally back up Jayden Higgins this year and had some nice catches. This is a guy that has always felt like he is a big time athlete, huge athlete. He's like 6'3", and he's got like high end track speed. He's got a huge vertical. This is a guy that always, just based on the physical traits that he's got available to him, always felt like a guy that if he could get it together as far as his route running, get his technique down, and really get better at his craft at being a receiver, that he could take off. And we saw, he only had a couple catches this season, but you know the catches he did have a couple, he had a couple really important ones. And again, this feels like a guy that as soon as the light switch comes on, he can be a really high end receiver. But obviously, we have not seen that yet from him. He's been inconsistent. He didn't play much as a freshman at all, and we'll see what he does as a sophomore. This is a guy that has big time athleticism, but we got to see it from him as far as consistency, in getting him, especially downfield, because Rocco likes to throw the ball downfield. So if you can let Benny use his speed, that's a guy that can take the top off of a defense. But we got to see it from him. Next guy down, Brett Askelson. He really came on. Obviously, you can see he played a bunch. It was mostly on special teams. Came on really towards the last couple games of the regular season and into the bowl game, where you saw him make a few plays. Obviously only had a couple catches, but this is a guy I know that they were really excited about through camp and into the first part of the season with just how quickly he was progressing. And I think it's a guy that you can look at as far as next year being, this guy can really be a nice rotation player. He's not like huge, 6'1", 190, but he was just a sophomore last year. And I think this is a guy that has a real chance in camp this year to bust through and get into the rotation. Next guy down, I think, is one of your contenders for really, really increasing his role next year, and that's Isaiah Alston. Typically, this Isaiah, I think, was one of the many stories that you see in college football where you see a transfer and they struggle to pick up with the speed, especially when they're transferring from a lower level to a higher level, and it just takes them some time to catch up to the faster pace, to a different offense, to the better competition. It just takes them a second. And I think that's what happened here with Isaiah Alston. But, you can see, he only had a couple catches, but they were for 26 yards apiece. And that was kind of what the advertisement on him was coming out of Army as a transfer coming into last season, was that, Army doesn't throw the ball a lot, obviously, but when they threw it to him, he was an explosive receiver with, high end speed up to, down the field. And it's a guy that you can look at and say, okay, this is an obvious one where if he's caught up to the speed of Big 12 football and he's gotten used to the offense, this is a guy that in spring practice can make a ton of headway because he's got the size and speed. At 6'4", 200. That's a big receiver. He's got the size to be a wide receiver one if the light comes on, and he's able to slow the game down. He's more familiar with the playbook and all that. That's an obvious candidate to make a big jump to wide receiver one role next season. A couple of these other guys down here are interesting. I don't know. We'll have to see. Dominic Overby only played in 6 games, but he did have the one catch, I believe, was at Utah. I think this is another guy that you're looking at as potentially being a guy with a lot of room to rise. He's not a big guy. He needed to put on some weight. He's 6'5", he's huge. He's really tall, but he's only 180 pounds, which is not nearly thick enough for how big his frame is. But he came out of school with track speed as a long jump champion out of out of Utah. And it's he's got all the measurables there, kind of much like Benny Nagoye, where he's got all the measurables as far as size and speed that you want in like a wide receiver one type of frame. But it's a guy, he just played 6 games as a freshman, and he can make a lot of room in the spring and becoming more of a, expanding his route tree, especially being more of an underneath runner. Because right now his skill set mostly lends him to running deep routes and to running kind of deep crossers where he can really open up his speed a little bit. His technique currently right now doesn't allow him to be super effective underneath, like on slants and dig routes and crossing routes. But that's a guy that, like I said, he can he can make a lot of headway this spring if he's working on his craft. He can move up, he can fly up that depth chart pretty quickly. Kai Black is I believe he's going to be a junior. Yeah, he's going to be a junior. He's out of Urbandale. He's got a good frame on him. I believe he's like 6'3". Just haven't seen a lot of him so far, and we'll see if he can make a jump. The story is that there is a lot of room on the depth chart for guys to rise up, because you've got two major vacancies at wide receiver 1. So you're looking at this this depth chart. There's a ton of opportunity for these young guys. They did grab a couple receivers in the recruiting class, which we'll go through here in a second, but there's not an obvious number 1 receiver on this team right now, as far as like, okay, this guy's going to be wide receiver 1, this guy's going to be wide receiver 2. And that's not because there isn't talent there or there's not experience there. It's just that when you lose 167 catches or whatever it is off of your team, that's a lot of targets to go around. The main guys you're going to be looking at to bring in, which we will, let me pull that up here. I'll pull that up on the screen for you. The incoming guys that I think are really going to be that I would say did a nice job in the transfer portal here. There we go. I would say did a really nice job in the transfer portal at receiver and in the freshman class as well. But anymore, you're really talking about the transfer portal as far as getting immediate impacts. We will come back to the freshmen here because there's a couple really interesting names in there. But let's go ahead and go down to our transfers. The first one to commit was Xavier Townsend. Xavier Townsend was originally it was actually a long time ago, was an Iowa State verbal commit and then flipped to UCF before his freshman season. He went there and mostly at UCF, we saw a lot of him running jet sweeps and things like that. They really didn't throw the ball to him downfield very much. And I think that's largely a product of UCF's offense and their quarterback talent, which has been not great the last couple seasons. They had KJ Jefferson this season. He wasn't very good. And then they switched to a couple other guys. They just didn't have the guys to throw the ball to him downfield very much and really utilize his speed, because Xavier Townsend is a high-end athlete, 5'11", 185. Got tons and tons of speed. I think Iowa State will know how to use him, and I think you're going to see Xavier Townsend play the Jaylen Noel route, the Jaylen Noel role, where you're going to see him in all sorts of route trees. You'll see him on deep posts, burning guys down the seam. You'll see him run underneath routes. You'll see him in jet sweeps. You'll see him in screens. The best way you can use Xavier Townsend in your offense is to just get him the ball with a blocker in front of him. He is an exceptional athlete, and I really, really excited. I was very excited to see when Townsend came here, because he transferred after the 4th game of the season to preserve his red shirt. So he didn't even lose a year of eligibility. And this is a guy that I think he's gonna have multiple years in Ames. He is gonna, right now, I think he's the shoe-in. I think he's the clubhouse leader to be your slot guy, just because he's so versatile. You could stick him back there to return kicks and punts like Jaylen Noel did. He can run the same route tree that Jaylin did. We'll see what his technique looks like as far as getting open, but he's got all the athleticism in the world to be able to do that. And he's got lots and lots of game experience as well. Dynamic playmaker. I was very, very excited to see Xavier Townsend's name pop up on Iowa State's transfer list. The other guy here that I'm very, very excited about is Chase Soule. So Chase Soule was originally a Colorado Buffalo that was shown the door essentially when Deion Sanders came, and he transferred to East Carolina and had a really nice really nice year there. I think he was there for 2 years. He's 6'4". If you watch his tape, he's really good after the catch. He's not afraid to put his shoulder down and try to run through guys. But he's a good athlete. I mean, very comparable to a Jayden Higgins. Does he have the same kind of top end speed? I'm not sure. We'll have to see it on the field. Field speed and timed 40 speed are two different things. But looking at his tape, he's certainly fast enough to play in the Big 12 and to get open. So this is your guy that if you're right now, if you're looking at your clubhouse leader to replace Jayden Higgins, this is your guy. And like I said, there's the other guys that are already on the roster will have plenty of opportunity to rise up because these guys are going to be new to the program. They're going to be new to the offense, new to the terminology and all that. But Chase Soul was so, highly sought after transfer. I have to see if I can see what his offers were. He had a lot of big time teams after him. I know Miami was one that he was really looking at a lot, and he's from that area too. So Miami was one that when they offered him, I was a little worried about. But he is honestly, really, really big time. Let's see. Let me review his recruiting profile here. So he came out as a mid 3-star, didn't have a lot of offers coming out, but went to Colorado, and then obviously has worked his way up. He had a lot of big time offers when he was this past offseason transferring out of East Carolina, and Iowa State got him. I'm assuming that's on the basis of, they saw what they did. He saw what they did with Jayden Higgins last year and said, I'm roughly the same size of guy, same kind of athleticism. They can use me in the exact same way. And I think that's what Iowa State intends to do, is to essentially make a 1-for-1 replacement for Jayden Higgins. And I think he's got the size and he's got the skill to do it. And he's the guy too that is also very, very good after the catch. He can make plays. If you're running him like on a crosser route or a slant or something like that, he can do damage after the catch with his feet. So there's a lot of room for different pass catchers on this team. I'm excited about the guys they brought in with transfers, because I think with Soul and Xavier Townsend, I think you have two guys there that can be your kind of clubhouse leaders to take over the 1 and 2, but it's certainly not a guarantee. They're just transfers, so they're certainly not a guaranteed to start. And you've got guys on the roster already that look like they can contend for that role. And we'll know more after spring practice. We'll see, with the roster sizes changing, maybe you see, if a Benny Nagoye can't break his way up into the roster, does he look for snaps someplace else? I'm not sure. I have no idea. I have no inside info that Benny is going to transfer or anything like that. But, it'd be one of those where maybe he decides to do that. We'll know a lot more about this position room after spring ball, when we see, who kind of pops up a little bit further up on the depth chart, who's getting some little bit of hype. Some of the birdies start chirping about who's getting a little bit of hype coming out of spring practice, if anybody transfers, things like that. So a couple of the guys, let's look at the freshmen here real quick. They signed 3 of them this class. There we go. So we got Dylan Malone, and Karen Brookins. I think are both interesting guys. The 6'4", 6'3", they're taller, big body guys. I don't think they'll play a lot this fall. We'll see. I mean, I would say it has a history of, if they pick up, if freshmen pick up an offense and are ready to play, I would say it's not afraid to throw them out there. But Matt Campbell has also in the past said that he'd rather play a guy too late than play him too early, and just making sure that they're ready to go. So you could see them in their redshirt games. I don't think that's impossible at all. But I'm not expecting to necessarily see them too much this year. The guy, I think that if you're going to see one of these 3, play more than their red shirt this year, I would look at Xavier Robinson. He's a really high-end athlete. In high school, he had a little bit of trouble staying healthy, but when he is able to stay healthy, he is a big-time explosive athlete that I'm really excited about. He's 6 foot, $175, which isn't huge, but when you're playing in a slot, Jaylin Noel was only 100, 5'10", 190 pounds or 185 pounds or something like that. Was not a big, heavy guy. In modern football, you don't need to be some big burly dude. If you can run good routes and you have the speed to do it, they can get you the ball anywhere. K the Man 6'4", how's it going? It's going good, man. I'm having a good time talking Iowa State football right before we watch some Iowa State basketball here later. Top 10 basketball team as well too. So, Xavier Robinson, I think, is a really interesting name. Actually, fun fact: Xavier Robinson is one of 2 Xavians that Iowa State has in the recruiting class across football and basketball. Because Basketball has an incoming 2025 freshman also named Xavier, spelled exactly that same way. Got to be the only school in the country that has two Xaviers coming in as freshmen. So, anyways, the freshmen are really interesting. I don't think you're going to see any of these play a ton this year, but if I was going to pick one that's going to see some time, maybe even as a returner, something like that, I think Xavier Robinson is the guy. West Des Moines Valley, so local kid. As long as he as long as he's can stay healthy, I think he's got a chance to be a big time playmaker. Caden said he's got a couple things. He's got a couple of things he got to say about Iowa State. Let's hear what you got to say. And while you're getting those comments going, we're going to keep moving on to the tight ends. So the tight ends. Well, one, you can see right here, Iowa State did not actually take any tight ends in the freshman class. And that is for good reason, because they have a pretty substantial stockpile of talent in that room right now. Let me pull up the roster here real quick. So if you're looking at tight ends here, you've got a pretty nice little stockpile of talent here. You looked at Gabe Burkle was third on the team in catches after Jayden and Jaylin last year. Mainly, I think, he stepped up big time in his role. One of the guys that I think, that we thought was gonna be, have a bigger role last year was Ben Bramer, but he had a lot of injury problems last year, just couldn't quite stay healthy. Only played, I think, 8 games. This is a guy next year, if he can stay healthy, that next year you're looking at Ben Bramer being, hopefully being a like a second team all Big 12, first team all Big 12 type of guy. That's who you hope. That's who you really hope can be your guy next year. But you don't necessarily need him, because you can lean right back on Gabe Burkle, who played a lot of really, really nice snaps last year at tight end. He's a good run blocker. He's a huge, he's a massive human being. It unsorted my roster here, so let me resort here so I can isolate my tight ends. So, Gabe Burkle's a humongous human being. He is, let me see if I can find it again. Yeah, he's 6'6", 260. He's huge. He's like the size of like Dylan Sainer, if anybody remembers Dylan Sainer. You've got a lot of talent there, but then behind him, a bunch of other really good, really talented guys. Cooper Alexander was a very highly touted freshman out of Oklahoma that I would say beat out Oklahoma to get. Tyler Moore is a guy that he's been mostly a run blocker up to this point in his career, but we've seen his pass catching chops, and he can catch some balls and run after the catch a little bit. So we'll see what they use there. You've got a plethora of talent here. At least I would say at least 4 guys, Bramer, Moore, Burkle, and Cooper Alexander for sure, that you're looking at. Like, these guys can be, pass catchers in the offense, they're not just, H-backs or anything like that. The main, and speaking of H-backs, the main guy that you're losing from this group is Steve-O Klotz, who played kind of the F-back, H-back role for Iowa State, in the last couple of years, kind of the primary run blocker. That's the main guy that they're going to have to replace and find a guy. Right now, I would guess it'll be Tyler Moore would be that guy. I'm not 100% sure, but we'll see. Someone in that group is going to be the Steve-O Klotz, Samson Buckner, that kind of role, where it's just a hard-nosed dude that just goes out and runs people over in run blocking when you get guys running downfield. The first guy through the A gap on some of those dive plays that they like to run. I think there's a reason they didn't take a freshman tight end here, and I think it's because they've just got a ton of depth in this room that they've built up. Keaton, and don't forget about Keaton Roskop. He was a nice recruit there out of Linmar, in Marion. And even like Trip Walsh over there, he's a guy that I think can push his way up into the depth chart if if he can fulfill that Steve-O Klotz role. So lots of here. Oh, I forgot to change my banner. So the tight end, my editor's gonna be mad at me because I forgot to change it to tight ends. But the tight ends here are there's a nice group here. In the past we've seen Iowa State when you had Charlie Kohler and Chase Allen and Dylan Sainer and Sam Buckner, we were seeing them go with 12, 13 personnel, 13 personnel quite a bit, and had great success with it. Now you're going to use that mostly when you can get a really good running game put together, and when you have Dave Montgomery and Breece Hall, it's really easy to put a good running game together because you just got to give them the ball. Um, but you think if you think going into next year that you've got another really good running game, you've got a really good running game on deck with Carson Hansen, Abusama, Dylan Lee. Um, you know, if you think you've got the running game to do it, you could see more 13 personnel. They've got the talent here. It would not shock me to see um, multiple formations there where you've got Ben Bramer, Tyler Moore, and Gabe Burkle all on the field together. Or if you want to go 3 receiving tight ends, Cooper Alexander, Gabe Burkle, and Ben Bramer all on the field at the same, all on the field at the same time. I wouldn't be shocked to see that, especially like in the opener against Kansas State when you could throw all sorts of weird stuff at them. So it's a really exciting position group. Caden says he's got Iowa State as a college football playoff contender pick. Caden, I am in agreement with you. I know that I'm biased here, but I do think that Iowa State is a playoff contender next year because I think that they are a Big 12 contender. And if you are a contender to win the Big 12, then you are a contender to make the college football playoff. So I think you're absolutely justified in saying that. I will be more and more on board as we see news come out about who's emerging at receiver, who's emerging as the second corner, what the offensive line is looking like, and the defensive line as well. When we see more information about those, I'll be even more on that train. But I think right now the potential is absolutely there for Iowa State to get to the playoff and to win their first Big 12 title and to get to the first Big 12 title since World War I and get to the playoff. So you wouldn't be shocked if Iowa State beats Clemson in the playoffs. It was interesting. It was about a month and a half ago now actually almost 2 months ago now after the national title game. I went through, we did an episode on here where we talked about the college football playoff bracket from this season and talked about which teams Iowa State, had a good chance to beat, had an okay chance to beat, it's a 50-50 and, which ones would be an upset type of thing. And I had Clemson as a team that Iowa State could have beaten. Maybe it's where you're 50-50 shot or better against a team like Clemson. I think that could have been a really interesting matchup, a fun rematch of the 2021 Cheez-It Bowl. I think Iowa State's got a shot to be really good next year. We'll see. Can they follow up with another 11-win season? I don't know. We'll see. I think the schedule sets up all right. We also did a schedule breakdown a few weeks ago, looking about that, where I think Iowa State's schedule sets up about as good as it can for the opponents that they have to play. You get pretty much all of your difficult games are at home. Your easiest opponents are on the road. I think that's, there's definitely a path there as well. So before we wrap her up for today, we're gonna finish just a touch early. Cade's been saying that Iowa State could shake it up and give Clemson and Alabama problems. Man, I hope so. That that would be something. It's a tough one because Iowa State does not really get to play on the same playing field as Alabama and Clemson. Not that they don't share the same, they wouldn't play on the same field if they played, but they don't have the same circumstances in terms of established program tradition and recruiting and financial support and things like that. Where Alabama and Clemson both have, Clemson has a pretty substantial donor base, and Alabama does too. But Alabama also has the benefits of a very, very lucrative SEC contract. So they're not really playing on the same. They're not really playing the same playing field as far as recruiting and money goes. But as far as just on-field football success goes, could Iowa State have beaten Alabama last year? Maybe. But, that doesn't mean that Iowa State can't be competitive and give them a game in a playoff game or something like that. In Clemson, is it going to be a little bit of an uphill battle against? Is it going to be an uphill battle against an Ohio State or an Oregon or a Georgia or something like that? Yes, absolutely it is, because Iowa State will be disadvantaged, specifically on the offensive and defensive line, where Ohio they just have a different caliber of athlete than Iowa State can typically recruit and develop. But that doesn't mean that on a one game sample size in a playoff scenario that Iowa State couldn't give them a game. They're plenty talented enough to do it. They've got good quarterback play. They've always got a solid defense. So it's always an interesting conversation as to what can teams like Iowa State or Arizona State, who absolutely proved that they deserve to be in the playoff and deserve to have a bye, with how they played Texas in that playoff game too. And despite the one head-to-head result in the Big 12 championship game, I do believe Iowa State was every bit as good of a football team last year as Arizona State was. They were just a little bit more banged up, going into going into the end of the season, especially with Iowa State with all the injuries they had to deal with, that linebacker and tight end. So, I think it's an interesting conversation about where Iowa State can stand going forward. As revenue sharing starts to change the landscape a little bit, Iowa State's held its own in the transfer portal as far as not losing guys that you really need to keep, but also getting guys in the transfer portal that Chase Soul could have gone to Miami and probably made a lot of money. And I believe, actually, I think he got an offer from Florida as well, which I think, now that I think about it, Florida was the one I was particularly worried about because Chase Soul's parents both went to Florida and he's from Florida. So, when Florida offered, I was, everyone was like, shoot, we might we might lose Chase Soul. We might lose Chase Soul to Florida. And I'm sure Florida would have been able to offer him quite a bit of money. And it's not that Iowa State can't, get guys taken care of that need taken care of, but they can't offer Florida money. But it's one of those where Iowa State was able to get a guy that SEC teams wanted, that high end SEC programs wanted, and you're able to keep guys like Dominique Orange, and you were able to keep Jayden Higgins this past season. And you're able to keep Rocco Becht. You're able to keep Abu Sama and all these guys. That they've done a great job. They haven't really gotten burnt in the transfer portal by NIL yet. Right when the transfer portal opened up, they did lose a little. They lost Craig McDonald to Auburn. That was the first one that we were like, oh, okay, well, he left for money, and if it is what it is. I'm not here to condemn athletes for leaving to go get some money. I'm not here to condemn them for that, because we've all taken jobs to get better pay and all that too. But outside of that, since that happened 5 or 6 years ago now, this was not a situation that the transfer portal and NIL really hasn't burned Iowa State in terms of the transfer portal. Has it prevented them from getting certain recruits? Maybe. I don't know. It depends on what the recruiting trail looks like and what the conversations are with the recruits and their parents and things like that. But Iowa State is not typically recruiting guys that are going to be really nitpicky about money, or where they're going to say where getting 100,000 versus getting 200,000 is a big deal to them or something like that. It's an interesting one. We'll see how long Iowa State can stick out with that and continue to avoid getting losing big time guys to the transfer portal and on the recruiting trail to blue bloods. But for right now, they've done a great job. And I know I've talked to guys in the industry that there are other programs getting frustrated with their lack of ability to pull talent off of Iowa State's roster, that they're getting actively frustrated because they can't buy guys away from Iowa State. So that's a really interesting dynamic. And that my source from that is a person well established in the SEC as well, that the programs that they follow have been trying to peel Iowa State guys off of their roster, and they have been very unsuccessful because they just will not leave. They're incredibly loyal to Matt Campbell, and I think that's a great sign going forward. Kane says he wants me to come over on his live stream. I would be interested in doing that. If you want to shoot me a message, shoot me a private message, and we can maybe figure something out. He says, Texas had a lot of help from the refs in order to survive Arizona State. I don't disagree with you there. Arizona State kind of got hosed on a couple of those. There's a pass interference in there. That was, a couple of those calls were pretty dicey, and I thought Arizona State probably deserved to win that football game, but it is what it is. And more importantly, Arizona State deserved that they proved that they belonged on the same football field as, an SEC title game participant to show that the Big 12 can put out really good teams as well, which was important for the conference's in terms of their reputation and their status going forward, and the respect they can get from the College Football Playoff Committee. So, so interesting. We will, going forward, we're going to continue In future weeks, we're going to break down more. So next week, we're going to, the next episode in this series, we're going to be talking about the offensive and defensive lines, really talk about the trenches and how Iowa State can start making more headway there. And next week, actually, we will also be beginning we'll have the Big 12 tournament seeds for basketball. So I apologize for anyone that's only into football, but we are going to talk a little bit about basketball the next few weeks anyways, because Iowa State's got a real good basketball team. So we're going to talk about them a little bit. So I appreciate everyone sticking out for that too. So yeah, I think Fongway's got a great, obviously should be good again with Rocco Becht coming back. Absolutely. When you can have that kind of consistent quarterback play, you're going to give yourself a shot anytime. So before we wrap her up for today, Iowa State tips off at 8:00 against BYU on basketball. So we're going to talk a little bit about Iowa State basketball. For anybody that is not paying attention, not necessarily a big basketball big guy, or you really don't pay attention until you get closer to the tournament time. Iowa State right now, Iowa State has been a top 10 team all season long, top 5 for a lot of it, top 10 for most of it. Playing BYU tonight is a tough opponent at home. This is an opportunity for Iowa State right now, who has been dealing with a lot of injuries throughout the season. They really, the last game against Arizona at home on Saturday was the first time that they had really played with their full healthy lineup in the rotation since beginning of January. Because at the beginning of January, Milan Momcilovic broke his pinky finger on his non-shooting hand and was out for about a month and missed a number of games there. And Iowa State had a rough stretch through there. And then as soon as he comes back, then you have Curtis Jones and Keyshawn Gilbert both go down. Curtis Jones with the flu and Keyshawn Gilbert with a leg injury. And so now you're playing down 2 of your best scorers. And you win a couple games, lose a couple games, lose a tough one to Oklahoma State on the road, which is, Oklahoma State's not very good. But then you come back, finally, everybody's back and healthy. And we are reminded why Iowa State was a top 5 team for most of the non-conference and why they have been getting Final Four hype all season and are absolutely at this point in the season, when fully healthy, Iowa State is absolutely a Final Four and maybe a national title contender. You have a 4-headed monster of Tamin Lipsey, Keyshawn Gilbert, Kurt Jones, Milan Momcilovic. That is a very difficult backcourt to deal with. You've got Kurt, who's a good defender, but more importantly, he can really stretch the floor from 3. He can get very hot from deep, but he can slash. He's just a walking bucket. Dude just gets points. Similarly, Keyshawn Gilbert is another guy that just gets buckets. He turns it over a a little bit too much for my liking, but part of that is kind of the deal with Keyshawn because he's a super aggressive player. He's a very good defender and a very high-end slasher that can step out and hit threes once in a while. Tamin Lipsey just set as a junior the Iowa State career steals record at point guard, which is a pretty incredible feat. You've had some really good point guards at Iowa State and Monte Morris. Go back to Jamal Tinsley and Jeff Hornacek and these guys. Lots of really good point guards at Iowa State, but Tamin Lipsey has already set the steals record as a junior, which is extremely impressive. And he's a very good ball distributor, and he's getting better at finishing at the rim. He can step out and knock down some shots outside. Then the previously mentioned Milan Momcilovic is a nice, a true a wing. He's a versatile wing. He can knock down shots on the outside. I think he started the last game against Arizona on Saturday. He started the game 4 for 4 from outside. Is super crafty in the mid range. He has this Dirk Nowitzki fadeaway off of 1 foot. That's really, really difficult to guard. When he's hot, he changes the offense for Iowa State and makes him extremely difficult to guard, because if he's hot, then you can't dedicate as much, dedicate as much attention to Kurt Jones and keeping him off the 3-point line. And if you have to focus on keeping a guy out on Milan Momcilovic and Kurt Jones, then you leave lots of driving space open for Tamin Lipsey and Keyshawn Gilbert to get to the rim, where Iowa State's bigs can clean it up on the glass. But I'm talking about all the offensive accolades, but Iowa State has been under TJ Otzelberger. Iowa State is an elite defensive team. They have been since he got there. They're not, the first few years of Tamin Lipsey's, or not Taman Lipsey. Well, yes, Taman Lipsey's, but the first few years of TJ Otzelberger's tenure, they were a top 5 defensive team and just kind of hanging around in the 50s and 60s in terms of offensive efficiency. But this year, they are a top 15 team in both defense and offense, which absolutely puts you in the conversation as a national title type good team. If anybody watching really enjoys good defense and fun scoring output, Iowa State's the team for you. They can be frustrating at times because they can turn the ball over a little bit too much, but they can score the ball with the best of them. They can defend anybody. They turn people over. They get up and down the court in transition, but in the offense, they're deliberate. And they do a good job of taking care of the basketball for the most part. At times they can be turnover prone, but they play really good, hard defense, and they give teams a lot of problems because of how much energy and how much toughness they play with. And we'll see, you get when you play in the Big 12, which is one of the best conferences in the country. It has been the best conference in the country for about a decade now, though the SEC is probably better this year. It's still Big 12 is still a very, very difficult conference. Play a bunch of very good teams at the top end. You got Arizona, Houston, Kansas, a bunch of really, really, really good teams. Texas Tech has been very good. Texas Tech has a national title, statistical profile as well. So we'll see what they look like. You get to the Big 12 tournament now that they've got the full rotation. You got a couple games left this regular season. They get to the Big 12 tournament. You got 5 games. At most, you've got 5 games ready to go before you get to the tournament. This is your time to get in rhythm. This is time to keep things moving along and trying to get back to where you were in December, where you were one of the best teams in college basketball, and you were, arguably, maybe in contention to be the number 1 team in college basketball there at the beginning of January. So big time for Iowa State basketball. For anybody watching the Big 12 tournament and the NCAA tournament, if you're looking for a fun team, definitely recommend watching Iowa State. They're a good, hard-nosed basketball team that gets stuff done. So, like I said, we're gonna wrap her up for this week a little bit early, just because we want to get ready for the basketball game. So, tip off here in about 15 minutes against BYU at home in Hilton Coliseum. But going forward for this stream, as far as football goes, we're going to be continuing our State of the Program series. Like I said, with the next entry in this series is going to be on the offensive and defensive lines. I think there's a lot of interesting names to talk about there. They've got to replace a big name on the offensive line in Jaylin Travis. Those are going to be the key to Iowa State, getting to the Big 12 title game again, but then hopefully winning it this time. So that'll be interesting. And I can say that I'm still getting the date not nailed down for sure. But I've got a very, very exciting guest that I think people, even non-Iowa State fans, will be very, very interested in checking out. So as soon as I get a date nailed down, I will announce it either on here if there's another week, or I will make sure to announce it on Twitter and on Twitter and Facebook and all that. Something you guys all know, but I'm very, very excited. It's a very fun guest that I think is going to be able to provide quite a bit of insight into the Iowa State football program. So thank you everybody for watching this week. We will catch you again next week on the Iowa State Cyclones Live, the voice of college football network. We will see you all again next week at 7 p.m. Central Time. Thank you.